Welcome to tonight's episode of Horror Stories, The Whispering Church. This is a story of ancestral secrets, supernatural whispers, and a church that never sleeps. If you enjoyed this immersive narrative horror story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more first-person supernatural horror stories. I never wanted anything from my grandfather, not his money, not his stories, certainly not the chapel. The letter came wrapped in pale blue vellum, the kind that smells faintly of mildew and forgotten drawers. A lawyer's seal, my name etched in faded ink. I almost threw it out, assuming it was junk or some scam. But curiosity, as always, is a stubborn itch. Inside, a deed, coordinates, a funeral notice. To my granddaughter, Elise Vallon. I leave the chapel of Saint Antoine de Merce. May it bring her peace. Peace, he must have been laughing when he wrote that. I hadn't seen him in 20 years. Last I remembered, he was already a shadow thin, leathery skin stretched across old bones, hands that trembled even when resting. His voice had gone quiet by then. My mother used to say it was penance. For what? She never said. When she died, she left no messages for him. Now he's left me a building no one stepped into for decades. A chapel. In the middle of nowhere. In a village I had forgotten how to pronounce. I didn't intend to go. Truly, I didn't. But the will required it. To inherit, I had to visit the property within 1 month of his passing. And I, in one of those dry spells of freelancing and loneliness, had nothing else waiting for me. Paris was growing stale. Even the ghosts in my apartment felt bored. I packed a bag, bought a second-hand train ticket south, and stepped into my grandfather's shoes. Literally, in one case, the key to the chapel had been tied with twine to a pair of his old leather boots, worn but solid. The village was called Saint Antoine de Merce, named, I was told, for the way its houses hugged the hill like bricks stacked against the forest. No one came to meet me. The innkeeper gave me a single room, the bed lumpy, the walls papered with dampness. When I asked for directions to the chapel, the woman at the front desk stiffened. "Oh, the old place," she said in a tone that tried to be neutral but couldn't quite hide the edge. "It's still standing?" "Apparently," I replied. She didn't look me in the eye again. It was nearly dusk when I reached it. The chapel stood just beyond the tree line, not deep in the forest, but far enough that the village roofs disappeared behind the slope. The path there had been swallowed by moss and fog. Branches tangled overhead like reaching fingers. At first, I thought it was a ruin. The roof dipped. Ivy crawled across its stone walls. One of the windows had shattered long ago, its fragments scattered like teeth across the grass. But the door stood firm. Old oak. A black iron handle. I turned the key. It resisted, then clicked. The air that greeted me was neither musty nor fresh. It smelled like dust and old rain and something deeper, like incense or rot. The interior was surprisingly intact. Wooden pews, worn smooth. A narrow altar, its white cloth yellowed with age. A row of candles along the left wall, though every wick had long since blackened. Behind the altar hung a crucifix, simple and unadorned, but something was wrong with it. I couldn't place it at first. The proportions were off. The arms stretched a little too long, the face a little too obscured. It looked unfinished, or worse, erased. I spent the night in the chapel's small back room. There was a cot, a cracked mirror, and a tiny desk. My grandfather's journals were stacked neatly in one corner, dozens of them, each wrapped in twine. I opened the top one. The handwriting was tight, almost anxious. Pages of prayers, written again and again. He speaks still. I am his last ear. The words made my stomach knot. That night, I heard it. The whisper, faint, distant, like the sound of wind running across a mouth. I thought it might have been the breeze outside, but the window didn't open, and the sound came from the floorboards. The next morning, I returned to the altar. There were markings along the base I hadn't seen before, faded script, perhaps Latin. I knelt to get a closer look. That's when I noticed it, a seam in the floor, just beneath the altar's shadow. A rectangular outline, subtle, but distinct, like a trapdoor. When I pressed on it, nothing moved. But that night, the whisper returned. Closer this time. It said my name. Elise. Not loud, not sharp, but clear. I didn't sleep. I sat up, the journal in my lap, reading until my eyes burned. In the middle of one entry, dated July 12, 1982, my grandfather had written, "The voice knows her. It waits." I told myself it was grief, fatigue, suggestion. But when I walked into town the next day, the innkeeper wouldn't meet my eyes. And when I asked a grocer about the chapel, he made the sign of the cross. "Don't stay too long," he said quietly. "Why?" I asked. His lips twitched. "Because the last one who did never left." That night, the whisper returned. This time, it wasn't a single voice. It was a choir, faint, hollow, like a prayer sung in a language I didn't know. And beneath it, the sound of something shifting wood beneath the altar. I lit one of the old candles. Its flame shivered. So did I. I didn't open the trapdoor that night, not because I was afraid of what lay beneath, though I was, but because I had the distinct, bone-deep feeling that it wasn't ready to be opened yet. Instead, I returned to the journals. The pages had become more erratic over time. The earlier ones were methodical, structured, my grandfather cataloging small repairs, entries on prayer routines, observations on the town's quiet decay. But as the years passed, the handwriting grew uneven. Whole pages were filled with circles, overlapping ones, spiraling inward, always drawn clockwise. Always in groups of 7.1 entries stood out. The voice is not God, but it is older. It knows me. It remembers. The chapel was built to cover it, to keep it quiet, not to honor it. The prayers are not for salvation. They are to keep the stone mouth shut. What stone mouth? I checked the floor again. The outline was clearer in daylight, like the wood had begun to loosen on its own. A thin crack had appeared down the center seam. The grain had darkened overnight. The boards felt warm. That night, I dreamed of fire, not flames, just heat, dry, suffocating. I stood in the chapel, alone, though I could hear 100 voices behind me. I turned, but there were no people, only pews filled with coats, shoes, scarves. As if the owners had sat down and vanished, the crucifix above the altar began to weep. Thick black tears. And the whispers came, but not in words. They hummed. A kind of low, droning song, beautiful and hollow at once. I woke with blood on my palm point, 4 tiny punctures, like I'd pressed my hand against thorns in my sleep. On the 5th morning, I found the door open, the trapdoor. The seam had widened. The center plank lifted. I hadn't touched it. There was no lock, no hinge, just a dark hole, barely 2 feet across. A broken ladder descended into blackness. The air rising from it was colder than the chapel. Damp, old. It smelled like limestone and candle wax and something metallic. I didn't go down. I told myself I needed more time, more light, a flashlight, rope, anything. But I knew, even then, that I was delaying the inevitable. I went back to the village. This time, I asked about my grandfather directly. The priest, a man in his 60s with brittle hair and watery eyes, remembered him. Vaguely. He was devoted, he said slowly, but not to the church. When I pressed him, he grew pale. He spoke to something. Out there, in that place. Said it listened to him, that it wanted to be remembered. I asked what happened to the last caretaker, that he hesitated, then whispered, "They listened too long." On the seventh night, I stopped dreaming, not because I didn't sleep, but because something else began to dream in my place. Images came, not as visions, but as memories that weren't mine. A child kneeling in candlelight, whispering into a hole in the floor, a group of villagers dragging a man into the chapel, binding him to the altar, a woman with no eyes, humming as the pews filled with blood. Each morning I awoke with more of my own memories missing. At first, it was small things, a birthday, a phone number, a teacher's name. Then larger, my mother's voice, the sound of my own laugh. By day 10, I couldn't remember what city I had come from. The journals changed. New ones began appearing, ones I hadn't touched. One had been placed on the altar. Inside, fresh ink, my handwriting, but I hadn't written it. She is listening now. She is beginning to hear. I decided to descend. I brought a flashlight, a coil of rope, and a lighter. I left my phone behind. It hadn't had signal in days, and the battery was dead. The ladder creaked beneath my weight. A dozen rungs, maybe more. The descent wasn't long, but the silence stretched. When my feet touched stone, the air shifted, thicker, like breathing through fabric. I stood in a small crypt-like chamber, the ceiling barely high enough to stand upright. The walls were covered in carvings, dozens, maybe hundreds of faces, all blank, smooth, eyeless, mouthless, except one. At the far end, carved into the stone itself, was a massive face, maybe 6 feet wide, mouth agape in a silent scream. Its eyes were closed, but wet, as if they had just blinked. Beneath it, a single phrase was etched in Latin, Auditor Perpetuus, the eternal listener. My flashlight flickered, the air grew colder. I heard a breath, not mine, slow, measured. Then, the whisper came again, but this time, it wasn't distant. It was in my ear. "We remember you." I stumbled back. Something caught my foot. A book point, one of the journals. New, still warm to the touch. The first page read, "You are his now. Speak, and he will know you." I don't remember climbing back up, but I woke in the chapel's pew, the journal clutched to my chest. The trapdoor sealed once again. My fingernails were black with dust. My lips were bleeding. And for the first time in my life, I prayed, but I didn't know who I was praying to. Time began to slip. I don't know how many days passed after I came back from the chamber. Could have been 2. Could have been 10. The light outside shifted in strange patterns. Sometimes, the sun would rise, pause, and dip again. Other times, it never came up at all. The village stopped existing for me. I never returned. The chapel had me now. It started with the reflections. The cracked mirror in the back room. It began showing things I hadn't done. I'd glance up and see myself reading when I was clearly writing, or kneeling at the altar when I'd been lying on the cot point. One morning, I found myself staring into it for hours. My reflection didn't blink when I did. It mouthed something soundlessly, over and over. Let him in. I began hearing sermons, not through my ears, but in the walls, in the bones of the place. The pews creaked like kneeling men. The stone floor hummed beneath my bare feet. My skin grew thinner, more sensitive. The building itself felt like a second skin. Sometimes I would wake up mid-sentence, whispering in Latin. Though I'd never studied it, my grandfather's voice came back to me. Only once to dream, I think. or something like it. He sat at the altar, back turned, facing the crucifix. But this time, it was no longer blank or misshapen. The figure hanging from it had his face, and it smiled at me. "We all serve something," he said. "Better to serve the listener than be ignored forever." The journals grew in number. Each morning, a new one appeared, some written in languages I didn't recognize, some in blood. One contained only a single sentence repeated 300 pages. "He is still listening." Then came the offerings. I woke to find objects placed at the altar. A child's shoe, a wedding ring, a photograph of a man whose face had been scratched out. No one had entered. The door remained locked, the windows sealed, but each morning something new. I stopped questioning it. Worse, I began arranging them, cataloging, cleaning the altar cloth, lighting the candle, preparing. One evening, I noticed my own reflection smiling, not in the mirrored eye, in the window glass, smiling wide, too wide. I wasn't. That night, I descended again. The trapdoor was waiting, already open. The stone beneath felt warmer than before, as if the listener had been breathing. This time, the chamber was different. The blank-faced carvings had mouths now, all of them, small, parted, as if mid-word. The eternal listener's mouth had deepened. It looked like a tunnel now, too dark to see the end. A soft wind blew from it, not air. I heard footsteps behind me. Turned, no one. But on the wall behind me, someone had scrawled, "He remembers the first. He will remember the last." That night, I dreamed of my mother. She sat in a pew, hands folded, eyes weeping black. "I told you not to listen," she said, her voice hollow. He heard me too, once. Then she opened her mouth, and inside, where her tongue should have been, was a tiny stone face. When I woke, the chapel felt different. The walls pulsed faintly. The candlelight cast shadows that moved on their own. I heard weeping in the rafters. I looked down at my hands. My fingertips had started to crack. Gray lines traced my skin, like veins or roots. I found one last journal. Hidden beneath the cot. Was my grandfather's final entry. The writing was slow, labored. "She is ready. The voice has chosen. I have listened long enough. The next must speak. She will do what I could not. She will open the mouth." The whisper returned. No longer distant. No longer faint. A voice, clear as my own, rang through the chapel. "Elise, the altar was never meant to honor. It was meant to seal. And now, you will feed me what I have hungered for." The stone beneath the crucifix cracked. I watched, unmoving, as a line split the floor. Not like a break, like lips parting. A second mouth, beneath the altar. The floor was bleeding. Not in the way wounds bleed, but like the chapel itself had torn open, and something beneath had finally begun to seep through. The stone mouth under the altar was wide now, wide enough to crawl into, to fall into, to be swallowed whole. I should have run. I wanted to, but my legs didn't move. Somewhere between fear and awe, I knelt, not because I was told, because it felt right. I thought I heard my grandfather's voice again, faint and frayed. He only takes what's offered freely. But when I looked up, there was no voice, no shape, just the cold stone and the candle still burning on the altar, flickering in breathless air. I began to speak, not words I knew, words I had never learned. To chant, deep and sharp, full of syllables that scraped my throat raw, but left my mouth like I'd been reciting them since birth. My voice wasn't alone. The walls answered, the pews, the rafters, the chapel sang with me. And in the stillness that followed, I finally heard him. Not just the whisper, the voice beneath all voices, the one that lives between silence. He didn't ask. He remembered. Everything. My grief. My questions. My loneliness. My longing to be seen. That was always the bait. Not horror. Not death. Attention. I stood, walked to the altar, looked into the mouth beneath it. It wasn't just a hole anymore. It was a throat, lined with carvings, hands reaching upward, mouths twisted in prayer, eyes gouged smooth. There was no end, no bottom, only a low, pulsing glow, and a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I didn't scream. I stepped into the mouth. The stone felt warm beneath my feet. A breath exhaled, slow, like a sigh, and I sank into the dark. No fear, just peace. Now I sit in the crypt. My skin is no longer mine. My eyes are blind, but I still see. They will come, eventually. More of them, curious, lonely, yearning to be heard. And when they whisper, I will whisper back. He is listening. And now, so am I. I backed away. Every part of me wanted to stay, to kneel, to listen, to belong. But some flicker of my former self, some forgotten defiance, screamed through the haze. I ran. Out the chapel doors. Down the hill. Into the snow and wind. I didn't stop. Not when I fell. Not when I bled. I didn't look back. They found me 3 days later, muttering, covered in frost, hands torn from clawing the earth. I don't speak much now, only when it's quiet, only when I feel watched, because the whisper never left me, and sometimes, when the lights go out, I hear him breathing. I realized what they were, not invitations, but bindings. My grandfather wasn't feeding the listener. He was holding him in place. So I rewrote the names. I poured salt in a circle around the altar, burned the old offerings, spoke the final chant backward, tasting ash and blood on my tongue. The mouth screamed, not aloud, not in sound. In memory. My thoughts shattered. My name burned away, but I kept speaking until the floor sealed. The chapel collapsed in on itself, quiet, heavy, and when I emerged into the sunlight, coughing stone dust, I knew he was gone. At least for now. But I left the journals behind, buried but intact, for the next to find, just in case someone stops listening. What would you have done inside the Whispering Chapel? Would you have listened or walked away? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this tragic ending to a supernatural horror story, share this video to help others find their way into the crypt. Until next time, keep listening.